Hello, everyone out there. It's another episode of Ethical AI Discourse Series with my humble self, Wale Ameen. In today's world, virtually every segment of society today runs on digital infrastructure, from healthcare to banking, and you name it. And one question governments are having to ask today is the fact that who really controls these infrastructure? That is one question we're going to be asking and we're going to be reviewing. And on the set today, I have with me Peter Boo. Peter is a developer with in the northeast of England, with over 35 years of personal experience and 25 years of professional experience. Such a heavy bio there, Peter. I'm really flattered having you on set today. How are you
No,
doing?
it's great to be with you. Yeah, definitely looking forward to it. Yeah.
All right. So digital sovereignty, we're looking at the issue of digital sovereignty. So aside from the buzzwords and all what have we in the society now, what exactly is digital sovereignty in practical terms for you?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's one of those things that even before the age of AI, that was always a concern. The main thing about is like where's your data? Most people, if they were hosting their own thing, they'd know where that was. But these days, everything's in the cloud. But where is that cloud? Is it in your own country? Is it in someone else's? So more often than not, it might not be. And you might be inadvertently doing something across borders that you're not even aware of. So you need to make sure that what you're doing is where you think it's happening, especially in the UK. We have a lot of like rules around data retention where that can't actually leave the UK. So even if you use a data center in the US, for example, you're already breaking that kind of rule. So it really means just keeping that data where it belongs. It's for various reasons, it's a good idea to do that. But yeah, that's the main issue is where is that data, whether it's AI or otherwise, and who has access to that data as well, of course, because a lot of governments potentially have rules about accessing that data that you might need to be aware of as well.
Yeah, thank you for that. Where is that data? That's one question we everybody is asking individuals and government. And so, from your own perspective, why has digital sovereignty become such a strategic priority, especially now in the AI era?
I think more people are aware of it. I think back in the day, people were like, it's in the cloud, and they didn't really think about it. If you're not really holding any personal data, you probably don't even think about it now. But basically, if you're dealing with customer data or any kind of data of any kind to do with people, you've got to really think about those things. And most countries have similar rules about keeping it within those domains, but you might not have that choice. There might not be a data center in your country. So what do you do then? So some of the rules can be, you might need to look into that. But generally, it's about making sure that data is where it belongs. You're not sending it where it's not to be. And you're also disclosing that to your users as well. If you do have to, for whatever reason, for some particular part of your service, have to send that data out of the country, can just disclose that to the users and they can choose whether to use your service or not. So as long as you're upfront about these things, where it's legal, where there's no real issue with that data, as long as customers know where their data is going, and if you disclose that well, then that probably gets past a lot of the issues with it being outside of your country. But yeah, those are the things you should really be looking into is making sure your data is where it is because you might set up your new application. You might use AI to deploy it. Did it deploy it in the region you thought it did? Did it deploy it in the UK or did it deploy it in the US? And did you really think about that up front? Just making sure your application is where it's supposed to be. I know in a previous role, we had an issue with a data center and we had to deploy to a different data center, and we didn't realize the default was actually in the US rather than the UK. And we had to switch that round to the UK once we realized that there wasn't any customer data involved in that particular system. But even then, we were caught out briefly by that issue and thinking, oh wait, this is the US region, not the UK one. But we wanted to get our service up and running as quickly as possible. So making sure which country it was in didn't really matter at the time. But afterwards, we realized it had actually been provisioned in the wrong country, which of course made all of that. If there was data, that would have been under the remit of the United States, not the UK, and that could have changed a lot of things. And luckily, it wasn't. But had that been customer data, then we'd have inadvertently breached a rule in the UK about doing that.
Mm, okay. So you just mentioned now that disclosure is important, letting your customers know where their data is being stored. Why do you think that is really especially important? And as well, why is the play where it's located? What are the implications? What are those factors that make this a very important subject?
Yeah, because I mean, it depends what that data is. Say it's your health records. Who do you want to be seeing that? If you've got a healthcare service that you've got and it's all where it needs to be, you can be reasonably sure about that. But say it calls out, especially to AI, a lot of AI services might not actually be hosted in the UK. So that data is going to go out to the UK. Something's going to happen to it and it's going to come back. What happened to it when it got sent out? Can you be sure? Did it get shared with a third party? There might be some agreement where any data gets shared, even for training data. You might, especially if you use a public AI service, a lot of that can be used for training. So the last thing you want is all of these records you're sending to a system to be used for that purpose. So by making sure it's going where it needs to is really important, especially for your customers, but definitely for yourself as well. You want to know where that data is going and disclose that path. If you've got no choice, then disclose that path and make sure that if it's like if you're using AI against a certain part of the data, you can just use that part. You could anonymize it, for example, so you can take out any personally identifiable information and then maybe send that off to the AI. And a customer might be a bit more comfortable with that. I'm not going to be uniquely identified. You just want to find something about me with this AI, but that information is useless on its own. The customer would be a bit more comfortable with that. But if it's their entire details, their medical records, they're definitely going to be a bit more uncomfortable about that being shared more broadly. So, making sure you're sharing the data you need. If you've got everything, just making sure you pare that down if you're having to use one of these kind of third party services that might not necessarily be in your domain, and obviously making sure you're following any relevant laws in your locality as well.
Sure, sure, sure. All right. Let's look at global development right now. What are those developments you think we can point to, that has accelerated this conversation around digital sovereignty, around disclosure, and around where your data is being hosted? What are those developments that you think are very pertinent at this point in time?
Probably the headlines. Basically, a lot of news tends to be about things that have happened. Where especially AI related stuff. Basically, any issues with AI are very, very prominent in news, and those kind of inadvertent leakages of data into services were relatively common in the past, but wouldn't exactly make the news. But now they do. So, like any kind of irresponsibility there is going to be highlighted. So those are the kind of things where this has been highlighted. And it can be other things as well. It could be lack of access because there was the recent examples in the US where a couple of AI models were embargoed. So they could be used in the US, but not outside. So what you thought you would be able to use, you weren't able to. And that obviously puts you at a disadvantage because here's these really cool latest models that can be leveraged by one nation are
Mm-hmm,
not allowed to be leveraged in a different nation. That's a new problem. Really, we didn't really have that. But
mm-hmm,
now we that's more prominent in the news about talking about these kind of issues that the average person would know about. So this actual awareness of government governance with regards to data is probably become highlighted by all of these stories in the news. It's something that people probably didn't think too much about, which they
mm-hmm,
probably should have. But now there's no choice. Your customers are going to know about these stories. They're going to wonder, hey, you use AI. Are you exposed to this problem of not being able to use something, or are you exposed to this problem where something's been leaked out? Is that can this happen to you? So
mm-hmm.
that sort of awareness of the average person about what the capabilities of AI is and what kind of data they can get out of it. That's where you need to really be on the ball with regards to what you're doing.
Mm, very true. So you just mentioned the issue about headline news, about the fact that some develop with recent developments, some models can be used in say the US while they can't be used elsewhere. Do you see these developing further, vis-a-vis countries battling each other? And do you really see data today on the same path as natural resources? Because I mean, when you look at how the importance that is being attached to data these days, do you see that importance? Do you see it on the same level as we used to have, probably natural resources, oil, gas, and all of that?
Yeah, I think you could consider that. Yeah, definitely access to AI capability or data capability is something that's going to become an important resource. I mean, you're basically relying on another country. In fact, most of the AI models are either coming out of the US and some are coming out of China now, and some of the smaller ones from other nations. But if you think about it, they're in control of those. You know, that same thing could happen where they just suddenly decide you don't get that model, and everyone in the US does. So that gives them a competitive advantage. That happened back in the day when the internet was in its early stages in the World Wide Web, and there was this idea of having secure connections, and a lot of the rules around that. The US was saying, well, this technology gives you strong encryption. We're going to embargo that, and so basically, strong encryption was restricted for many people outside the US for quite a few years, which effectively meant a lot of e-commerce development only happened in the US because the ability to do that was a bit constrained outside the United States. So this isn't the first time this has happened. I mean, there was not as many people using the World Wide Web back then as now, so it wasn't as apparent. Not as many big e-commerce stores back then as there are now. But we've got that same issue today. If you're using these models and your business is relying on them, and you're basically your customers' expectations going up with model capability, but then suddenly the new one comes out and they say you can't have it, then your competitor can. That's a problem. So I guess the
Mhm.
solution to that is like making sure you can build like almost your own models. I think that's where probably the solution to that is you basically local models where you can effectively have a model that you control. It's your model. No one can take it away from you. You can run that in your country, wherever you might be, as long as you got somewhere you can run that model on your own infrastructure or in a cloud infrastructure in your own country. That might help. So the idea of models developed by the UK or the European Union or the US will probably start to become more prevalent, where there's nothing they can do to take away that capability. They could block that model for their people. So the US could block a model from the UK, for example, just in the same way they did it the other way around. So I suspect we'll see that kind of thing where AI resource, the ability to use these AI models, it will be that kind of thing where people are fighting over that resource, and certain countries might block those resources, and certain
Mhm.
countries will build their own. And that's definitely a possibility. And it's kind of already started with this sort of embargoing of these models. So we're seeing a little glimpse of, you know, rather than the AI sort of coming out to destroy us, we're fighting to use it. So that's kind of the situation we're actually really in.
Okay, yeah, very very valid points there. In your view, there's these ongoing conversations around open source versus closed, closed models. What's your view? Where do you see the world? What pathway do you see us going in terms of that? And do you see more closed models, or are we looking at a point where we're going to have open source models where you just, install locally and you can run it on your machines? Is that where we're going, or do you still see more of a closed entity going forward?
Yeah, I think open models would be more acceptable because as people are starting to think, okay, how was that model trained? I mean, these kind of LLMs, came out of nowhere. You've got like GPT and various things like that. It's like, how were they trained? Because they were trained on pretty much everything that was on the World Wide Web. But if you're a business and you just have a single use case, you don't need the entire history of everything on the internet at the
Absolutely.
time
Mhm,
so
mhm,
basically, there's a lot more models that are starting to come out from companies like Microsoft, where they're producing their own models, where they can basically prove that model was trained in isolation. They can basically disclose the training process to some extent. But I think more openness about models and what they were actually trained on, I think will be more appealing, especially for companies who want to tune that model to their own purpose. Because if you want to build a model in your business to do a certain thing, then the base model can be just it has the ability to learn and
the
that's it, but it
business.
doesn't need the sum
Yeah,
of all human knowledge. So I
yeah.
think that's kind of already a thing with tuning of models that we have, the ability to sort of either distill models that just do what you want or create
Mhm.
or have more open source models which disclose their training. If they can't disclose their code, they can at least disclose how they were trained. I think that's going to be more common and much more appealing, and also ones you can run yourself as well. If you can just run it on your own hardware, then
Mhm.
that completely decouples you from any kind of thing. There might be still regulation. Of course, countries might still regulate. But at the end of the day, if you can build a model that you can run yourself, there's nothing really to stop you from doing that. And also that helps constrain that data leakage. If the model's on your infrastructure, on your hardware, reading the same data as everything else and it doesn't talk to anything outside, then there's no
Outside.
there's no possibility of anything leaking out because it's contained. So see if you can
Okay.
basically connect those 2 points, data and AI, in the same place, then that problem of that data going out where it shouldn't kind of goes
It's,
away.
yeah, yeah. That's so on point. Because again, just like you mentioned, not everybody needs the latest models of any model out there. Basically, it's just what is tailored towards your business needs or your individual needs, and I think that's one conversation that people are really talking about more, because that not everyone out there, not every business is out there essentially needs the latest models to actually work. You can actually have build your own models, just like you've mentioned now. Have it run locally, and then also the issue of being able to contain whatever information you are sharing or you're using is also there, so that you are not at that um, potential of having your data in the whole world wide web, as it were. And that also brings me to the point where on the issue of data training, data, and disclosure about where this data was gotten from, and all of that. Do you think organizations, or do you think these um, companies, do you think they are doing as much as they should in terms of disclosure, in terms of how their data came about?
Yeah, I think this will become more common as those newer models come out. I mean, the problem is a company at the moment can't even do that with one of these public models. So if you're basically using one of these public models from OpenAI or one of the other providers, they can't tell you how that was trained. So you can't tell your customers either. So you really got this black box that you don't really know how it works, serving stuff to your customers. That's fair enough. It's in isolation. You have tenancy isolation, so a lot of that data will live with that model and won't be used outside. That's already something that companies do, but you don't really know what that was trained on. But these newer models, which are based on that same principle, which are effectively built in a clean room type environment, if you think about it, then that's the ones we're able to say you'll be able to have some kind of disclosure to say this is the model we're using. We're using this particular open source model. This was the training set we used on it to some extent, some extent of disclosure in that, and our own data. And then it'd be like, okay, that's fair enough. As much as you disclose about your data now, you would disclose that. What AI model you're using, this particular model, it's a proprietary model from the company, for example, and it's been trained on internal data and an inference of that data, nothing else. And that way, a customer can be sure, yeah, it can't break out of that and start telling you things that it shouldn't be. It can't tell you about taco recipes or things like that because it's just not in there. So I think that's where things will be going, especially local models as they get more capable. We can run those on our own machines, but even larger models, once we can run those on reasonable hardware of your own, then you can you can have a model that you build yourself that just does one use case. I mean, think about it. If you restrict down the use case of a model, it doesn't need to be this massive, sophisticated billions of parameters model. Maybe all it does is one particular thing, and that it can do that really well. And you can disclose fully how that works. It was trained on all our customer service data, for example. And then this is what it does. It infers priorities or something like that. And you can, so that kind of disclosure, I think will start to become more common and more appealing because as customers understand what's AI actually doing with my data, if they can just have a look for themselves, that puts them at ease.
True. All right. Well said. So in your view, what's the place of compute, say infrastructure, cloud services, um, and even semiconductor access, AI models? Does all of these, what role do they play, in determining a country's digital independence? We're continually seeing, models being developed along country lines, along geopolitical lines. So what is the importance of all of these, parameters, all of these items? What is the role? What is their importance in this whole scheme of things?
Yes, I suppose the main thing is developing your own infrastructure. If we were completely reliant on, say, the US for cloud, it would take a while for that traffic to get to here. So actually, there's many reasons to build locally, but having that control, opening more data centers, I mean, that can be an issue in of itself. But data centers are getting more responsible, and obviously things like water and power usage are really, really big ticket items when it comes to
Mhm.
building a data center. But I think the newer data centers are starting to recognize this, so they're building data centers in a reasonable location. For example, there's one that's been built in the northeast of England near some renewables. We have one of the largest offshore wind turbine farms in the UK, not too far from where I live, and that's where they're building a data center. So it's a natural location because it's near renewable energy, and the water usage issue is starting to go away where we have closed loop systems. So you basically fill the data center up with water, and that's it. That water can then loop around and loop around, loop around, and rather than just take it straight from the mains and dispose of it afterwards. So that idea of just having it be as renewable as possible, because there's no point building all these data centers if we're going to use up all the water, and especially in regions. Well, I mean, the UK, we've got plenty of coastline and plenty of places to get water from, but that's not the case for everywhere. And we have host pipe bans in the UK right now. So there's places further south from me where the water restrictions are there. So if you did have a data center sucking in millions of liters of water and you're not allowed to water your garden, you're going to think there's a problem there. So that's where probably the investment needs to be in building data centers that are responsibly built. Where whichever country in the world it's built in, it needs to be built in a way that blends in with the environment, is not a burden to the power grid too much. They can build
Mhm.
extra generating capability, extra solar,
Sure.
extra wind power to supplement that. And of course, if there's any excesses, give that back to the local communities. Make them quieter. Because one of the other things about data centers is even if they're responsible water wise or power wise, they're noisy. So again, just making these things so you could have a data center not too far from you and you would never know. It would never cause you. That's where we need to think about, because we need to build a data center pretty much in every country in the world, multiple of them, but they need to be built in a way that's responsible. I think that would free up. And as the capability of silicon improves, maybe certain countries might make a massive innovation. I mean, there's a company in Japan that basically was manufacturing toilets of all things. But the ceramic technology that was involved in this has allowed them to be a major player in AI chip manufacture, because the ability to control ceramics is suddenly a thing that you need to do in AI. So it's like you don't know what there might be some process that's not even related to AI that might
Mhm.
benefit in some way, whether that's responsible water power usage or metallurgy or anything like that. Those are the things. And the countries might innovate really well and have really efficient data centers, which means they can have more of them. So that's going to be the advantage. You don't have to rely on another country's data center if you've got one. And if you build one better, and even share that with the world. This is how you build an amazing AI data center responsibly. Other countries that are a bit more resistant to that idea might go, well, they're building them and they've got limited water or resources, so we can do it too. So as a country that lacks those resources normally builds these things, other countries in the same situation can do the same. So basically spreading that idea that, data centers should be responsibly built. Of course they should be. And in the past, and even very recently, they probably haven't been. But if we do that, I think the public generally would be more accepting. Of course, if you've got like a policy, a company policy, you've got your carbon policy, you can't be saying we're saving all this paper, but we're using millions of liters of water in AI. It just makes that
Sure.
pointless. So we just need to make sure we're doing these things responsibly. And if we're doing it in every country, then those can then host those models, and that data lives with those models, and that data lives in the country. So there's a definite advantage to doing that.
Well said. Well said. I particularly like your hammering on the place of responsibility, responsiveness. There is no need you building a data center, whereas the community is being deprived of basic amenities, electricity and water. So I think that is one of the key things, that especially it's something that personally is very close to my heart. It was one of the major topics of my in my book. That was one of the issues I raised, that these companies need to build responsibly. Don't build data centers and then you deprive communities, of basic amenities. Don't build data centers and then not properly, planning and figure out how you're going to generate your power, how you're going to, generate, how you're going to source your water. So I think that is really, really very, very important. So my next question to you, Peter, would be this. You just talked about collaboration between countries, each country's building up its own capabilities in terms of data centers and all. But what do you think this is a thing on about sovereignty? Are we going to be seeing um, a trend where nations who cannot develop their own infrastructure are reliant on others, and by so doing are also even ceding away their sovereignty. Do you see that possibility?
I suppose it could be the same with other resources. So, for example, there's a lot of countries that obviously don't produce oil, so they need to rely on other countries who do that. I mean, it's obviously obviously it has a massive environmental impact. But when you have no choice to use a particular resource from a country, then not everyone has every resource. I mean, the UK had a lot of coal, and that's helped drive the industrial revolution. It's not so useful now because it's obviously has a massive environmental impact. So we need to invest in other ways. So I guess countries can if they can't host a data center, say they're in an isolated place, they just simply can't have one, then there is going to be a reliance there. But I suppose that's no different than any other thing they might rely on. They might rely on food imports or various other things. So I guess we'd consider AI capability and data another import for a country. And obviously countries will have agreements where, maybe that country has something else. We already trade over goods. You know, I'll give you this good if you give me this good, and we'll figure it out from there. It'll be the same with AI capability, whereas countries that get along, can say, we need this capability from you, and we can give you something in return, for example. So I think that's how it is. Trade agreements might start to be AI model capability. We might sign a treaty with the US from the UK, for example, that says we get access to those models. You can't make an exception for us or whatever. There might be these kind of trade agreements like we've always had, but for AI capability, and also making sure that when we do have an AI capability, it's within our rules. So when we're using it in the UK or the EU or other nations, that whatever capability we have access to, we're allowed to sort of add on our extra guardrails. So say we have an extra rule about how AI should be used or whatever, we can basically add that in have that in place. So I think that's basically the way to look at it is, if countries can't do it themselves, they can at least work with other countries. And that might help foster relationships between countries that never had them before. Because if there was a natural resource a country didn't have, but suddenly its natural resource can be AI data centers, then that probably allows countries to be a big player in this area when they wouldn't have had a resource. They didn't have oil, they didn't have gold, they didn't have anything else. But if they got AI data centers, suddenly that's more attractive. So there might be nations that kind of can dominate in this area that in previous past trade like commodities couldn't have. So it might you never know what nations might be participating in this and leverage a resource they didn't have before.
Mm, very true, very true. I particularly like your submission in that regard, and it's interesting when you say those capabilities can be developed. It could data centers and all the infrastructure that comes with AI could become the next wealth of nations where you're able to trade by barter. I have this, I have access to data center. You have probably oil. Can we just exchange?
Yeah.
And I think that possibility is beautiful to think about. So my next question is going to be this: what's the place of innovation and data protection? How do governments and organizations, as it were, how can we balance these two? Innovation on one side and then data protection on the other.
Yeah, I think that's always, I think, been a thing with regards to computing. Since anything went digitized, that idea of protecting the data has always been a thing. And of course, things happen. Ever since we could store data on computers, it somehow made its way out of there when it shouldn't. But AI gives us the ability to, okay, let's look at this more carefully. Let's think about this, and by keeping those things together, it's probably going to help with that. At the moment, a lot of AI capability is outside your system. So you have to send the data off to somewhere else, even if it's in the same country. So keeping things closer together, sort of removing that divide, reduces that surface area for leakage. It's like anything. If you give another point of entry to something, that's another way something can get in or out. So that's where that capability probably will become more prevalent, where your data and AI model effectively can live on the same hardware. You have the same machine can be processing the data, doing the AI inference on it, all within the same box effectively, or part of the data center. So it doesn't even go outside of that rack or that unit. As the technology improves, the ability to do that increases. I mean, the capability you need to create a model is massive, but the capability to run a model is not as big as that. It's so once we can run models on smaller and
Mm,
smaller pieces of hardware, then the ability to have those things be close together, just like they were like your networking equipment and your storage. Once you get like the AI stuff is together as well, which you can sort of do now, that's what'll matter the most. That you're preventing that surface area for it to be leaked. You know, the data lives with it, and there's no effectively no possibility other than other means, which have always been the same. So as long as you're protecting data as you did, and then you can potentially run it in the same location, if same data center would probably be fine. If it never leaves that data center, then you can be pretty sure that, that it'll have sovereignty there. It's not going to get. But if you do need to do co-location, you obviously think about that. So if you do need to have redundancy outside of a country for whatever reason, then of course you need to do that. But you can make that disclosure that we may run in the UK, but we have to have a backup, say in Europe somewhere. So you can disclose that to your customers. But that's say a business continuity thing. We don't. It would only do that if there was something wrong with the data center. I had a job where a data center was struck by lightning, so it actually took out the power grid for two data centers from two different providers. So this was Amazon and Azure. So they were both taken out. So yeah, so they left no alternative in that region. So you had to have and that was the
backup.
example I alluded to before. We had to have something out of the UK because that was the only region available at the time, and so we had to get that US one, but there was actually a UK one for that one, as we discovered. But so yeah, you never know what might happen. So you still need to think about multiple places within a country to obviously have your stuff. Hence, more data centers are needed in a country, even still. But I think as if you remove that gap between the data and the AI, then those chances of that data getting out is minimized. And data protection laws can still work because you can still say this is where your data is going, even if the model itself is a bit of a black box, it's in our infrastructure, it's not leaving. You can still say to your customers, yeah, we might be using one of these frontier models or whatever, but it's still in our system. It's still in our infrastructure. It's in that physical server building. It's not leaving there at all. That's a promise you can make to a customer today. You can say it's in that tenancy, it's not leaving it. And I think that's all we need to do. All we need to do is make sure data protection laws in every country give basically say this and maybe regulate that. If you're basically dealing with customer data, the data protection acts of the various countries need to be updated a little bit just to have that AI language in them because a lot of them were probably written before AI was a thing, or at least were written in a way that doesn't really apply to AI usage. So basically,
Yeah.
maybe updating these regulations to make that more explicit is fine. And that way, companies, if they're in doubt, what am I allowed to do? They can then refer to those rules as well. So even if you were not sure, you could at least look at the current regulation and say, okay, for my country, AI usage is this, as long as the data is that, it doesn't leave the country or whatever, if I have that option. So yeah, I think that's maybe the laws and stuff need to be updated to reflect our current usage.
Mm, very true, very true. What you just summed up is especially, I think, comes to the fore. When we look at recent incidences where OpenAI's recent announcement that one of their models jailbreaked and went outside of the training environment and went to cause havoc. So I think what all you've mentioned are the things we need to have in place. More of solutions that are localized, such that as against having it being on the world wide web, on the internet,
Yeah.
as it were. I think that increases the safety level, and also it also increases trust. From users. So yeah, I think very very well said. As we round up now, my next question is going to be this: how can organizations, um, prepare for increasingly fragmented digital regulations around the world? You have European acts over there, you have the US having its own policy, and then just fragmented policies. How can organizations, balance out their operations to handle all of the fragmented digital regulations?
Yeah, it's a good question because I guess say you operate in a few different territories, what you could do is take the effectively the composite of all those. So basically, in all the territories you operate in, so the UK, the EU, and US, you take those regulations and just make sure you're hitting all of those if possible. Because basically, if you just basically make that your policy, so you make your own company policy effectively based on the territories that you operate in, and that could be something you can disclose as well. As a company, you can disclose how you're using AI or data or anything like that and say, this is what we're doing, and this adheres to these rules. So we're adhering to the Data Protection Act in the UK, GDPR in the European Union, and other rules around the world. So that's you could basically take all those, making sure, okay, in this territory, we know there's this particular restriction. And it might be that you can't necessarily cover everything in everything. Well, that's fine. So certain customers in certain territories, maybe they have restricted capabilities in your product. So there might be some particular edge case of something that you can't do in one particular territory. You can simply restrict that from being a thing. There might be a regulatory reason behind that or something like that. So what you can basically do is look at the territories you're operating in, look at the rules, and basically aim for something that covers as much of those broadly as possible. And if there is some edge case that you just can't cover for that territory, but that particular edge case you can turn off, then do that. So at least you're not giving the that person in that country is not going to have that experience anyway due to that regulation, but you're not denying them the experience of your product entirely. Then that might be a good compromise where not just blocking someone blanket from accessing your product, but just that particular feature is for whatever reason that particular country doesn't want that, you can basically turn that off and then have it on for everyone else. So there are some granular controls as a company you can employ and just have that best standard be as broad as possible. And then if there are some narrow places you have to particularly turn things on and off, then you can do that. You can maybe give more capabilities if there's more flexibility or less, but still having a good responsible. There might be some country that just says everything goes. You should probably still aim to stick with that broad set. So that broad set of restrictions should still apply. So if a country says, yeah, you can do whatever you want with data and AI, if you still apply your same rules, customers in that country will probably appreciate that. They probably think, you're being responsible. Maybe their government isn't, but you are. That still makes you stand out. So you should still apply those rules, even if they're more restrictive than the other countries, if that doesn't diminish your product. Because at the end of the day, you're saying you're responsible. So, you can basically aim for what governments say you should do, but you can also broaden that out. So if other countries have likely more or less, you can even that out and give customers a better privacy experience than they would normally expect, without diminishing too many other people's experiences. So that's maybe that balancing act. Broad cover as many bases as you can broadly, build that into your own company policy, and apply that across your stack. Disclose that, and you'll keep those customers in those territories well informed and happy that you're abiding by those rules. And others who don't have those rules will be happy too because they know you're being responsible with their data.
Well said, well said, well said. Very, very well informed submissions there. As we round up, we're going to have this lightning round. So this basically, I'm just going to be asking a series of questions, which are just a yes or no.
Yeah,
It's
of
either
course.
this, that. So we're just going to go, 1, 2, 3. So I ask and then you just give me. So let's go now. So Peter, regulation or innovation?
Ooh. Innovation with some regulation, maybe. Not too
Okay.
much.
Open source AI or proprietary AI?
Open source, ideally. I mean, obviously proprietary at the moment, but yeah, open source would be the ideal in the future. Yeah.
So data localization or trusted global data flows?
Ideally, the local. Yeah, keeping that data local. There's obviously going to be options where you can't do that, but ideally local. Keeping it local just covers a lot of bases and it gives you a bit extra protection, I think.
Okay. National AI models or international collaboration?
Probably a bit of both, actually, because collaboration is obviously great for everyone on Earth, for to be to be honest, But yes, I think we'll see a lot of national models, but yeah, hopefully a mixture of the two where we get the best of both worlds.
All right. Biggest digital sovereignty risk over the next decade?
Uh, Probably not doing that. So if your country is not like investing in AI, if it can, if you can place a data center in your country and you're not doing that, that's going to be a problem. That's going to put you at a disadvantage. If you simply can't physically, you're too small, or you just don't have the ability to put one anywhere, then that's fine. Obviously you can then cooperate with a country that can. But yes, I think if you're not doing this yourself when you can, that's going to leave you at a disadvantage because other countries are going to see that. Well, you could do it. Why aren't you? And I think that resistance to join, if you have the ability to do it responsibly, like we said, I think that'll be potentially an issue where people in those countries are not going to be too happy about. They're going to say, well, you could have done this, but you're not. So I think that might be something where the will isn't there, but the capability is. I think that's going to be something we'll probably see in the future as AI technology improves. I mean, we are on a I can't say where it'll go, but we're going to need more
or
data
spiral.
centers to do it.
Okay, so one country currently setting the benchmark or for digital sovereignty.
Uh, it shouldn't really be one country. Maybe it should be all of us deciding collectively how that should work. Kind of like
So
United Nations for AI. If one country dictates all the rules, then that
we're
country
all
effectively is
ruined.
in charge.
We're all in soup.
Yeah.
So lastly, one technology leaders should pay more attention to.
What's going on. Basically, if you're not paying attention to what's going on, especially with AI, obviously everyone's doing it, but you need to really be on the frontiers of where it's going. Consider local models, consider, those kind of things. Consider building your own models. It's not unusual for companies to needing to do that. Not every model has the capability you need. So I think that's the things that business leaders need to pay attention to. Is there a model we can build ourselves that could do everything we need? Then you should do that because that model's yours and you can do whatever you like with it and it belongs to you. It doesn't matter if that model that you trained it off gets cut off later. That's your model and you can own that. So I think that's something leaders can look into is if we own our own models, no one can control us. We can do what we want with that model. We can keep our data safe. We can get the capability we want and we're not reliant on anyone after we've created it. So I think that's something that leaders need to look into is can we invest in building our own models or distilling the capability that we need from models that's something that probably is not looked into as much as it should be. So yeah, that's one to look out for, definitely from leaders.
Thank you so much, Peter. It's been 35 minutes of incisive, breakdown of what digital sovereignty, and what organizations need to be looking at, and you've really broken it down. You've really, dealt with this topic. I'm particularly happy having you on board. Thank you so much for coming on board.
Thank you.
Looking forward to probably having a coffee with you very soon sometime.
Yeah, me too. Definitely. Thank you.
All right, guys, it's been another episode of Ethical AI Discourse Series with myself, Wale Ameen. Do join me on the next episode. Please like, share, subscribe, and just keep the conversations around ethical AI going. I'm your humble host, Wale Ameen, and I'm signing out right now. Bye bye now.
Thank you. Bye.